So welcome to Watching the Detectives. So obviously this morning's panel we were trying to look at writing and developing models for writing scenarios. This panel really is about, mysteries are hard to write. Creating a mystery that's satisfying for everybody, it's tricky. And I think that's one of the reasons why Call of Cthulhu does very well in selling published scenarios, is because people do struggle with it. So the idea of this was to sort of look at what can you take from famous mystery writers, famous mystery series, and how can you use that to help inform your own creation of mysteries. Might work, might not. There are certain things that you can get away with, certain things that you can't get away with. So, Mike, what's your favourite fictional detective? Who is your favourite fictional detective? Do you have one?
I think my favourite fictional detective is probably Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes. I also, I have a soft spot for Philip Marlowe, but Holmes, I guess. What about you?
I have to say Columbo, to be quite honest. I was raised on watching Columbos. I absolutely adore them. Holmes and Miss Marple, close second, but there are some that I've come to love later years. Mrs. Bradley, Miss Fisher, things like that.
Of course, I would be remiss not to mention the genius of Murder, She Wrote, because she outclasses everyone because he knows what's going down.
Yeah, but seriously, if you saw her coming, wouldn't you be running in the
opposite
direction? And it's good you mentioned that, because there are some things from Murder, She Wrote that you should be aware of that you don't do when you're writing a mystery. But we'll come on to that. So I'm going to ask you now, Jean-Christophe.
Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes, Nigel?
Miss Fisher.
Miss Fisher.
Second.
Good man, good man.
Peter Wimsey.
Yes. Yes.
Always a good one.
Poirot.
Poirot.
Good choice.
I might say Columbo as well.
Poirot. Favourite detective?
The one from The Killing.
Oh, I haven't seen those.
Can't think of a name actually in The Killing. Yeah.
I'm much more of a cosy murder mystery person than your gritty Scandi noir things. So I'm a bit rubbish that way. I have to say, I quite like
Tennyson, Helen Mirren in
Prime Suspect.
You've got a hottie for it.
Well, who hasn't?
It's true.
From
Ooh, good choice.
the Swedish detective.
Now are we comparing him to the English Wallander?
Oh, Mr. Bernard, yes. And I watched the first few of those. Completely failed to realise later on that actually Tom Hiddleston is in the very early ones. And it's interesting when you go back, actually, this is complete aside, when you go back and watch, because I've been rewatching the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes recently, all the baby famous people coming up through ITV drama. So there's Hugh Bonneville, Jude Law, James Purfoy. There's all these very young people getting their start in these sorts of things. It's always interesting to see who pops up where. So, good old Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie, some more modern things, some things that are, do you like the writing, do you like the dramatisations, or is it a bit of both?
For example, I started watching Poirot when we were deciding to run Call of Cthulhu, and we thought of doing it, at least part of the campaign in London. So I started from there, but then I got lost into this. Forgot about all the details and everything that was going around, and started concentrating on the actual mystery.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the dramatised versions can be very useful for sort of a period feel. It's certainly something for masks. I stuck a little bit in for Miss Fisher. There's a reference to Miss Fisher in there. Not particularly Cthulhuid, but if you're looking for period feel for Australia, that is the series that you go and have a look at for 1920s. So let's start with Holmes. Let's start with the daddy.
That's
I know it's not. I know technically not. It's Wilkie Collins and the Woman in White and Murder in the Rue Morgue and all that sort of stuff. So, but he does cast a big shadow over everything. Does Sherlock?
yes.
Now there are 3 chapbooks out there by a gentleman called Baron Kingsman, who actually takes 3 of the Holmes stories and breaks them down. So there's Scandal in Bohemia, Red-Headed League, and A Case of Identity. So it's basically a case with those. If you pick your favourite story, because they're all very similar, you get the story, and then he breaks down how they work so that you're not creating an exact replay. Because as he said, where's the fun in that? People know what the story is. It's using that as an inspiration. So if you're looking for someone who's done that sort of thing, those resources are out there. And a lot of the Holmes stories are problematical to use as a model because, let's face it, Conan Doyle cheats like a so-and-so. There's always something that Holmes knows that you as the reader doesn't know, which means that you can't solve the mystery. So that's key point number one.
Not until the narrative decides to reveal that, which is normally at the very last minute, so Holmes can appear. Of course, what you didn't realise was this.
Yeah.
There you go.
So that's the thing that you don't do in your mysteries. Make sure all of the information is there for your players, because they're going to get so frustrated and annoyed.
It's okay that it's that you piecemeal it out, and it's but you've got to make sure that it's that like for every they've got to go and do something, but they will get something hopefully, and even if it's not the full clue, they get enough of a lead to take them to where they need to go next, what it may be, and so they feel they are progressing rather than you can do it. There are some scenarios where end of the scene 1, you have all of the clues, and actually the task of the scenario is for you to decipher the clues and to make them work, and that will lead you to a climax. But don't tend to be done in that way, but you can do it. Yeah.
But say, key point, make sure that all of that information is there. Now, certain games, if you're going to do the dice roll, some people are sticklers about, they didn't make the dice roll, so they didn't get that information. Always be prepared to move that information. Make sure there are multiple points where people can get that information from if they wandered right past your carefully constructed clue dispenser. That there is somewhere else that they can get it from.
Interesting point on that. Within the last week, somebody was, I think on BRP Central, complaining that that's railroading, moving the clue to somewhere else so they have a second chance to get it. He determined was railroading the player.
That's interesting.
That's interesting and incorrect.
Yeah.
That's not railroading.
I told him, you've got it totally wrong. You're doing it wrong.
I mean, the thing is, you don't. I mean, if you've got a serious problem and you have a serious problem. Put it another way, if you just dislike the idea of moving clues around, then there are rules within the game to accommodate that. You make sure that the clues are obvious clues written in the rule book. That means players will get them automatically.
Yeah.
Avoiding the need to make a search roll, have the clue in plain sight.
Yeah. It's the interpretation that
then
becomes important.
Clues do move because what is your interpretation of a clue? I mean, it's a piece of paper or a book. Well, it's actually a person because it's the information they perceive, so that you can move them around because they leave that building and go to another building where perhaps the players are heading to. Or
they're not sitting there going,
clues don't have to be
they're not arrived yet, I'm going to have to stay for another hour.
They can move around and what the clue could be. The clue could be the fact the sky has gone purple in the middle of the day is a clue that something is kicking off.
Or
orange, like you did on Monday.
Yeah. You know what I mean.
Apparently that didn't do that here.
No, we got all the Sahara.
We got all the special sky. Now, like you said, don't cheat like Conan Doyle does. The other thing that I mentioned, which is back to Murder, She Wrote, is the guest star of the week syndrome. Let's face it, with most American TV dramas, murder mysteries and things like that, as soon as you see the guest star, they're the deader or they're the bad guy, they're the murderer. That's your two options. If you see special guest star, they're either going to become a corpse 5 minutes into the programme or they are the gurning bad guy. So be careful when you're constructing your scenarios. that the only person that they get to talk to, there is not just one person they get to talk to, because automatically that then has to be the bad guy because they've not spoken to anybody else. Give them plenty of people to interact with so that they do have that, that doubt. Who could it be?
There is a thought, obviously, within Call of Cthulhu, because it's a lot about clue gathering. Whatever information you, as the keeper, impart is important. So any NPCs you give to the players, all of them are important. Any information you give clearly is important. Now, there's two trains of thought of that. Some keepers will go, but I'm going to obfuscate the clue by giving them useless information as well. I'm going to say, yes, you're in the library, and give them a load of handouts that have got nothing to do with the plot. Not even red herrings, they've got to wade through all this stuff. And I'll hide my clues in plain sight, but they've got to work to find them. And there is the other thought, well, it's the nature of the game, is here is the clue, precisely written, that's what you get. And we assume you've gone through a load of stuff, but that's the gameplay in the background. A few hours have passed, this is what you came out with. And both are valid, but I think it very much relies on the kind of players you have, whether they enjoy that first one. Because I've tried both over the years, and I've ended up going, players don't really want to waste all that time, and they could actually be engaging with the game far more realistically.
And that's something that works in live role playing that doesn't necessarily work in tabletop. If you've got a 3-day live role playing event, you can give your players the library full of stuff and they will happily spend their time going through it because that's part of the experience. If you've got a 4-hour game, no, not necessarily, unless your players do love that sort of thing. So again, it's what we were saying this morning, it's horses for courses. If you're tailoring it specifically for your group, you know what they like, play to their strengths. One of the other tricks I did, I think this is actually still up somewhere on the Pelgrain website, when I was doing stuff for Dying Earth, I did a murder mystery based around the Kane City source book. And I used to run it at conventions, and it was always a different murderer. It was always the same cast of characters, but I was led by what the players were interested in. So I would present them with the information and I would let them draw their own conclusions. And because it was a convention game, so they got that satisfying conclusion, I would then tailor it so that it went where they wanted. I might throw in one red herring, so they'd make a mistaken conclusion to start with, but then it would pull round to who they wanted to frame, basically.
And of course, that's replicated to some degree in the Crimson Letters scenario in the back of the 7th edition rulebook, where you are presented with what the plot is and then given a range of NPCs, all of which have different motives and all of which could be the villain of the piece. And, obviously the advice we write is that, before you play, decide which villain you want to, have in the piece. So of course, in real life, we all know that you might change your mind in the middle of the game. If the players are getting a bit too close to one, you think, well, you can throw it on that one then. And you can play it around, which, again, might be railroading. I don't think it is. I think it's being creative with the game and ensuring they're having a good time.
Yes, it's ensuring that your players are getting something out of it and they're not feeling frustrated, because that's one thing you've got to be very careful with mysteries, is not frustrating the players.
You don't want to lead them too far down the path to feel, to feel that frustration. But
one of the interesting things that sort of encompasses several of the bits you've been talking about is the usual suspects. I'm saying that, thinking most people have seen it. The scene in the police office where he's being interviewed, and then when he leaves, the policeman looks around the room,
sees all the visuals,
and gets a barrage of, wow, I didn't realise I've been in this office for weeks or days or months or whatever, and I didn't pick up. What he was doing was taking that bit of information, adding that bit of information, that bit of information, and you can make up a series of clues like that and have the PCs roll for it or not, according to how your players feel about these things. Do they want to roll and have the excitement of making the roll, or do they want, well, it's in plain sight, I should get it?
And of course the other thing you can do, which we have we do with Call of Cthulhu is, you make your library use roll. It's not whether you get the information, it's how long it takes you to get that information.
Yes.
Yeah.
And is that clearly explained in 17, Mike?
Yeah, I mean,
I think it is,
I think so. I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of the pushing examples give a good, give good suggestions on those lines, because they say that library use, in terms of failing a push roll, tends to be around time. It's right. If you're trying to attempt a push roll in a library, you can only look at a book so many ways. So it's actually the length of time you've spent doing that.
Or do most players assume they know how it works?
Well, yeah. I mean, any role-playing system,
I failed my roll, I don't get the information, rather than I failed my roll, it takes me all today and half of tomorrow to get the information.
No, I mean, I'm constantly surprised by people who play different games and clearly are playing on the rules that they made up in their head and not the rules in the book, because they maybe glanced at the book and read it 20 years ago, and since that have never really looked at it again, and they've just made these rules in their head, and they think that's how the game is meant to be played. So when you introduce something different and or change the rule, there's this perception that you've ruined the game, and actually if you go back to the original game, actually that rule was already in there. We didn't change it or make anything new at all.
Monopoly is the classic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where everybody plays it differently and nowhere near the rules as written.
Oh yeah, because it's a hideous game, and it's even worse if you try and play it with the actual rules. I don't like Monopoly. But I mean, the key thing with this, as we said, is be flexible with your clues. Make sure that they're all there. And again, it's what we were talking about this morning. Keep it simple. Don't make it too complicated, because your players are going to complicate their own lives. They will draw inferences from those clues that you never put there. You never realised that they would draw. And simplicity is key.
I was running a convention game earlier in the year, and it was the last half hour of the game after a 4 hour slot. And I'd engineered the clues that they all would point, because it was a convention game. I wanted to get to a climax and end the game. So I was pretty clear that the end of the game is here, at this location. Someone's been kidnapped and they've been taken there. You've been told they have been taken there, and unless something happens, they could be in for it or whatever. And I know you're looking for this sort of bit of a clue, and so I put somebody in who said, yeah. They told me that such and such was going to happen here. So I've given all the information that it's going to happen here. And yet half the players still wanted to go and check all these minor little details here. Oh, maybe before we go there on the way, we could go by the library and check out a few things there. It's like, you've been told someone's going to get murdered here by 3 o'clock. Have you really got time to get a library? And some players just want to search every single avenue. And it's...
Good job the library was shut on that.
Well, exactly. You just have to be aware that some players will want to go down every avenue. So you have to kind of constantly think, well, do I need to provide them that many clues? Do I just keep it very simple while still allowing them to get what they want out of it?
Or just keep giving them the same clue from just a slightly different angle.
Well, and often it is.
Them.
It is the same clue coming from different sources in worded slightly differently, but it is the same clue sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes I find in con games, in order to move the game along, you have to say, you have gotten all the information you're going to get out of this NPC.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to say that as well.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to say, so we're going to red line to the end now, because we all know it's going to end up here. So you are stood there. What are you doing? There's a man pointing a gun at you, and by that time you just get into it if needs be.
Yeah.
But
most of the time, it's not that players know that is the ending. So most of us have very smart players at that table, and no matter how cool and complex your idea is, the party will always find ways and means to foobar all your plans. Wow, they just... So they come to this realization that the game is soon over, so let's check out that other cool content.
Because you want to make it last.
So we will make it last.
I paid my £3, I deserve to get my 4 hours.
Yeah, but I mean, and That's a nice thing though, because they're enjoying themselves.
Yeah,
That's the whole
Oh
point.
yeah, that's as long as
And
you're
that's lovely.
happy to go with it. That's no issue at all. It's when you're in a limited time slot and you want them to enjoy the game the most.
My players told me in my face, I'm sort of more of a pathfinder kind of DM, and my players sort of solve most of the problems which are intended to go with guns blazing with subterfuge and intrigue, and it's cool, it's cool. But they, for instance, bypass the entire dungeon and go directly to the main boss. So you are done over here, you can go back to the city and no, we don't want to do that, we're going back specifically to enjoy all the content.
And that's lovely. That's really sweet.
Oh, okay.
Just a question coming back to the obvious subject, basically. I had an adventure where basically I said something that there's ruins there, and people go, oh, let's go to the ruins, huh? And it wasn't the ruins, but it was so obvious that you throw something in, and people think that must be it because it's.
Going to say actually, you have to be quite careful when you're putting a mystery together. Is not to throw something that's going to. This is a true story. A friend of mine wrote a scenario and they just drew a map, and the thing on the map that was interesting was the manor house here, and the manor house has some grounds, and he just threw a few fields in, but there was nothing in the top corner here. It was just blank, and I'll just draw a dot there and put well next to it, and it didn't have anything to do with the plot. But as soon as the players got sight of the land and there's a well in that corner, there's not near anything else. I spent the entire adventure trying to work out why what was going on at the well when there's nothing going on at the well. So you have to be careful not to provide your players with an opportunity to miss the plot.
Yeah. Bright shiny objects.
Just don't
They'll go
put the
for
well
the bright
in.
shiny
If
object.
it's not happening at the well, don't put the well in.
I mean, that's a prime example of Chekhov's gun, isn't it?
Yes.
If you put the gun in scene 1, somebody's going to use it in scene 2. So don't put the gun in unless you want someone
Unless
to
you want to use it. Yeah.
But sometimes, they ask you something, you haven't prepared for it. You put something on the spot, and they'll expect that that's a clue, and just go the opposite direction.
I mean, of course, you can be a clue if you're confident and comfortable with the material to actually think, okay, yeah, there is a clue in the library that actually I don't think they're going to go to the library because they're talking about here. I can actually move that clue behind the scenes to there.
About 10, 15 years ago, I was running this fantasy campaign. So I've prepared a couple of encounters on the way. They were traveling through the mountains, and one of the rewards, instead of finding gold, was finding a map to avoid the other encounters. And 6 months later, they were campaigning to get rid of all the baddies from the mountains. 6 months game time.
Yeah.
And through my plans down the drain, basically.
But the joyous thing with plans is that they can always be reused and repurposed.
Yeah.
They're never wasted. It'll come in at some point. So you're golden with that one. You're absolutely fine. You will get to use it at some point. But that kind of brings you on to red herrings, which is something that Agatha Christie liked throwing in a lot. There was a blog post not that long ago, a few weeks ago, called Twisting Christie, and it had been written specifically for Gumshoe, but it was an interesting thing to look at, and it was sort of looking at, well, what's the basic sort of makeup of an Agatha Christie plot? And one of the reasons that Christie is such a popular author is the fact that they're very simple, they're very readable, she uses easily accessible language, she's got about 5 plots, recycles away through them, but they're still remarkably entertaining. And you always have the main plot. Obviously, person X gets murdered by bad guy. There's often a romance plot with bright young things running around falling in love. And then there's what they call on the blog, there's sort of like the other subplot, which is the sort of like a menace plot. And I would think more of calling it the red herring plot. So it's the alternative. This person is dubious and suspicious. They're attracting attention, but they're not the murderer. They could be, and they're there to sort of add complications. And there's something that really you can't always necessarily do, because as we were saying, you don't want to distract too much from the plot. You might want to have a bit of a red herring just to give them a bit of a run around, give them a bit more sort of feeling of satisfaction when they do finally solve it, but that's something that really has to be used carefully.
Yeah, I mean, this is all very subjective to the length of game you are intending to play.
Yeah.
If you're intending to do this long, quite complex, in-depth campaign that's going to take, a number of sessions, you can kind of play with that kind of red herring character a little bit more. You can allow them to have a kind of narrative arc that comes to an end before the main plot, as the investigators, investigate this red herring and get to a point and almost have a mini conclusion with that story, and that allows them to kind of close that down and refocus back on the main plot. But obviously, the trick to doing that is ensuring that the main plot continues to be happening while they're doing that.
Yes.
And it doesn't just sit waiting for the investigators to look at it again. It's still happening. The villain is still up to things. He may murder more people, may move on, may realise the investigators are too close and throw more weight on the red herring. So when the red herring comes to, it's clear that they're not involved, there is a clue back to the main villain because they was the one pointing the finger at the red herring, perhaps. But, keep the plot moving, I guess.
Yeah, and it's what you were saying again earlier, is the fact that make sure that the villains they have their own arc. They are doing things. Their actions aren't just purely reliant on what the PCs are doing, because they are independent. They've got their own plans.
You imagine it's a room and all the cultists sit there reading books until the investigators turn up and then, look like we're doing something. They're always doing something. Let them progress things, because that does help when players waste time, in a sense. If you want to call it generally wasting time, they go on exploring really minor leads that they know aren't really going to get anywhere. They're just kind of filling in the blanks and dotting every I and T. If the villains are continuing to do stuff, then all that wasted time will come back and be returned on the players, because they realise while we were wasting time, these guys have now built a super death ray rather than just having the pieces before that we could have stopped them building. They've built the death ray now, and it's even harder to deal with them. It's make it like real life. People continue to do stuff.
Yeah. And I think that is something that you do tend to forget, because you do tend to focus purely on the PCs and what they're doing. Things go on around them, things continue. They may be the focus of that little bit of story, but other people's stories are still continuing around them.
It's useful sometimes to have a timeline, whether it's put in by the editor or whether it's put in by the writer, of at this point in time,
yes,
this NPC does this, and then this, and then this. So by day 3, he's doing that, and that, and that.
Yeah, I've used that.
If you link that back to the major events from the PC's point of view, they go to the library, NPC moves one step down his track.
At one point, it might be that the NPC realises there's something really useful in the library there's something in the library that will reveal them to the PCs. So part of that timeline could be NPC burns the library down. So if the PCs don't go before that point, afterwards the library's been burnt down.
Yeah, I like the use of clocks in other games where you set a multi-segment clock going, and every time the PCs make an action that could affect the NPC, a segment of the clock is filled in.
Sure.
And when it's totally filled in, the NPC does
achieve what they were setting out to achieve, perhaps.
The PCs are delayed by 6 segments of the clock, therefore, and it's an easy visual way to track that.
Sure.
And sometimes you do need something like that, because you are doing a lot of juggling. You're trying to keep track of what everybody else is doing and keeping track of what the player characters are doing, and something like, and it's what we were saying this morning. You find the way that works for you, and you use the tools that are going to make it fun for you too. And that's something else that's worth bearing in mind when you're writing these mysteries. Make sure it's something you're enjoying, not just your players, because everybody's supposed to be having fun with it.
And that's why having a few moving parts, you're allowed to, as the keeper, move them around a bit, or have two villains, but that's the key villain, that's the minor one. You're allowed to swap them over. You know what I mean? Before, obviously don't swap them over once the players have figured out who's who. But while they don't know, you can still swap them over. You've got a bit of freedom to keep it interesting for you as well. So what can we learn from Columbo, Lynne?
Oh, I love Columbo.
Just one more thing.
One more thing. Obviously, Columbo's an interesting one because apart from, and I'm not talking about the modern ones, modern, mind you, they're still 20 odd years old now, the original ones from the 70s. The interesting thing with those is because you as a viewer, apart from in one case, exactly who the murderer is. And the joy of it is actually watching Columbo trip them up and hound them into doing something stupid so that they give themselves away. But of course the whole point is that Columbo hasn't seen them do the murder. There's still something about them that tips him off that it's them, and then he pursues them. But Columbo's interesting, particularly for period pieces, is because it's usually some form of technology. The bad guy's trying to prove how clever he is and how technologically adept he is. And they use answering machines. The one with
the latest technology.
Shatner has the video recorder. Things that you can never get away with now. And again, that's something you do have to bear in mind when you're writing modern mysteries. Yeah. Is the fact that because we've got so much surveillance technology now, and GPS and little things in your phone that tell people where they are, there's an awful lot of these plots won't work anymore without serious work. You can't just lift them straight from the pages of antiquity.
Yes and no. It depends who your player characters are.
Yeah.
If they're policemen with access and can ring somebody up to say, I want to see what the camera's on the edge of the street, I want to see the last 24 hours, and I can see the cultists, we got the name recognition on the number plate, then it's going to be harder because you've got to write that in because that's the nature of their characters. They have access to things. But if we're playing normal people who are not have access, I can't ring up anyone so I want to see, I might be able to go into the shop, and if I make my fast talk roll, I might be able to persuade to look at what they've got on the video camera if they remember to turn it on, maybe. But I can't, I can't feasibly go and ring up and say I want to run a number plate check on a car. I can't do that, so.
Don't know the right people, do you?
Exactly. But so understanding who will be playing in the scenario allows you can get away with some of it, but be aware of who's going to be playing in it.
If it's important that you have access to that sort of information, if you've made the clue, the bad guy's number plate, then you need a cop or a private.
You need to ensure there's a link into it, that you can persuade them or fast up, or you can bribe them, or there's a friendly policeman who comes around and offhand mentions something, or.
Right, and on that point, if you don't have a full team, it's always interesting to know which characters you can drop from a set of pre-gens. So, harking back to this morning, if you've got 6 pre-gens, but you know that the only person that can get a specific clue is pre-gen 4, you've got to make sure that pre-gen 4...
Yeah, see, I don't worry about that, because if we're going back to good scenario design, it doesn't matter if they get that one clue or not. Because because what you're looking to do is have no clue bottlenecks. So that clue is the number plate that tells me the person driving that car is Mr. Smith. I don't get that clue, so there's somebody in the shop across the road who I go and question instead, who says, oh yeah, I've seen him around, I think his name's Smith or Schmidt or something like that. I've just given the same clue away but a different way. So, you see what I mean?
That's railroading.
That's not railroading. That's called good scenario design.
Good GMing as well.
And GMing.
Good GMing as well. So Columbo, I adore it, but it is interesting from that viewpoint. Someone, his name is Nathan Paoletta, has done this beautiful little game called One More Thing. I've got no idea how easy it would be to play, but it's fantastic. We were talking about one-on-one games, it's written for someone to play the detective and someone to play the murderer, and you build the detective, you build the murderer, you create the murder, and it is inspired by Columbo, but there's all sorts of other series you can see he's taken elements from, and it works beautifully with. And you build that story, and you decide whether it's a sympathetic murderer or an unsympathetic murderer, and where they fall on this scale. And it's a really lovely thing to read. Like I said, it would actually, I would imagine, be quite tricky to play, but very worthwhile doing. So there are interesting games out there that do model these things. And if anybody wants the link, I can certainly dig it out for you. But again, with Columbo, there's still that basic detective work underpinning it, even though the hook to get you in is so different from all the others. And again, it's just underlining the fact that clues are important. Whether it's a murder or a bank robbery or whatever it is, whatever your mystery is, get those clues in there and make sure they're available somehow so that your story keeps flowing.
Of course, Call of Cthulhu often is a mystery, is an investigative style of game, but it doesn't have to be in any way. If you find all this clue business far too complicated, and to be honest, I'm too tired, I just want to play a good horror game, you can do Call of Cthulhu with that. You don't have to have any clues in it, and you can make it more like a horror film, where it's an event is happening, and your characters are caught up in the middle of it, and they never know why the zombie outbreak took place. They're just dealing with the fact zombies are trying to break in the house and kill them. Yeah, which in Cthulhu could be. I don't know why the Shoggoth is crawling across the lawn towards the Schloss at this point in time. We just got to deal with it when it gets to that window. That's the scenario, and that's equally valid and just as much fun. So so part of me just wants to sort of throw that out there and say, although I know we're talking about plots and mysteries, and that's what we're kind of all really cool. It doesn't have to be. If you're sitting there going like, it's too much hassle, like it's too complicated. Don't worry about it. Do it another way.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting resources out there though that you can use. I mean, mysteries in some ways, yes, they are hard to write, but you do have a lot of examples you can go and have a look at for like good practice.
And borrow the outline. If you like, okay. Do we all know the plot to Murder on the Orient Express? Okay, I'll not give it away, but let's just say it's a fairly classic one. But if you go and watch the new version of it, or go and read the book, and now you know the plot, which I'm not going to give away. And you think, actually, I really like that. I want to do that in my next game. And just borrow the entire thing and just change the dressing around it. No longer on the Orient Express. It's, murder on the bus to New York or whatever. And it isn't a villain. It was the Shoggoth in the toilet. I don't know. But, you can just wholesale borrow. And your players will love it. Because part of the fun will be halfway through, they'll twig what you're doing and they'll...
I'll tell you now, I would buy the campaign for Shoggoth in the toilet.
There you go.
Right, add that to the list.
Add that to the list.
Ask Andrew to write it.
But that's it, because a lot of the time with mystery and with horror, people like the familiar, because it's what I said about the cosy murder mysteries. The sort of like the nice period ones where, yes, there's horrible crimes going off, but you're all having tea and cake and being terribly civil about it. Or it's Miss Fisher cocktails. Whereas a lot of the Scandi noir ones are sort of like very grim and brutal and...
I mean, they remind me of that, talking about players who like to follow every lead and make the most of it and never quite get to the end and want to keep enjoying it. To me, that's The Killing. 2 series about one murder... and in that series, every single link is followed to its nth degree till it's discounted until finally they get to the person they should have looked at first. When you realise, well, clearly, why didn't they look? That's pretty obvious. Look at first, and then they found the murderer. But it takes 2 seasons and what is that? 8 hours a season, 16 hours to. Columbo would have done it in half hour, but
Yeah, 90 minutes.
I think this reflects things that games in some ways are closer to films, which
Yes.
is a good novel probably makes a better film than a 600-page classic.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
in
And I think that's why you see a lot of Holmes and Marple and Poirot adapted, because they're very fast reads. They're very easy to adapt. I mean, there's no one adaptation of any of the Christie stuff I've seen based on the books that I've read of hers. I've not read all of them because there's hundreds of them. There's always stuff to miss out as well. And again, it's like paring it back to the bare minimum to get that satisfying story out. So that, if you've got a 600-page mystery, really in-depth, really fantastic, that's a lot harder to pull the core details out of and repurpose than something which is a very fast, sort of like an hour TV show that you can lift ideas
Yeah, I mean,
from.
you can, like we were saying earlier about prepping to do a more complex Call of Cthulhu scenario, a pre-published one. You get your notebook out, as you read it through, scene 1 takes place in a hotel room. So, I write hotel room, murder, body there, 3 clues on body, in wardrobe, under bed. And that's my little aid memoir for that. Now, you can do the same thing while you won't do it when you first watch a film, perhaps, but you've watched the film and you think, actually, that'd make a great plot for Cthulhu. I could adapt that. You can just sit and watch the film again, have your pause button ready, and watch first scene and go, okay, first scene, okay, yeah, the man's murdered in the train, clues in the bathroom, got mud on his shoes. You just make a quick few bullet points. So by the end of the film, you've got your little notes, you've got your scenario outline more or less done, and some people would feel comfortable to just run it from that, because they'll just, go with that, and other people will, then, extrapolate and write that down in a bit more detail and how you want to do it. But, there's no reason why you can't just do that as well. It's a really, easy way of copying what can be a quite complex plot, but making it, bite-sized and manageable for you.
It seems to me that as a GM or an author scenario, you don't want to be the clever one. You want the players to be clever folks. So it's giving a structure for the players to invest some depth and emotion into it, and having the structure to allow them to do that. Because if you start putting that in, it doesn't communicate.
Moriarty is only a great villain in a campaign.
Yes.
Because he gets a chance to shine, but equally, so he gets a chance to shine maybe once or twice and kind of defeat the players and get away, but because it's a campaign, they will eventually catch up to him and win the day and be the heroes. In a one-shot, Moriarty runs away and everyone goes, how did he do it? It's not very satisfying for the player. Yeah. Yeah,
and it's what with the Columbo thing. It's the thing that, they're always trying to prove that they're so much smarter than this guy. So it's a real sense of victory for your players when they're so much smarter than this person who thinks they're way above them. So you've got those sorts of elements going on as well. You wanted to say something about True Detective, didn't you?
I wanted to throw, because in True Detective, there's a lot. I presume that, have you all seen True Detective Series 1?
Yes.
Yeah, some of you have. If you haven't, I do recommend it. It's Series 1 particularly, not Series 2. Separate. It's a separate, different thing completely, but I quite enjoyed that as well. But Series 1 is good. The points I wanted to make from it is there's 2 things that I find quite interesting and unusual if you apply them to Call of Cthulhu. In the programme, the two key guys that it follows start off as cops, and the story is told over a 20-year period. I can't remember exactly, but it's a 20-year period. So the show works that they are in the present day telling the story of what happened 20 years ago. But effectively, you talk about Call of Cthulhu, they start as cops. And so they have the full facilities available to the cops of the time, and they investigate this murder. And it gets so far, and then the trail runs cold, and they can't solve the murder, and life goes on. But there's something niggles both of them, particularly one of them. It plays on their mind, and they know they could solve the murder, but they can't quite put the pieces together yet. They have a suspicion, but they don't have the evidence, and that plays through. So they start as cops, but they end up in the modern day, where the story kind of flips over and becomes this tale now. They end up as effectively private investigators without resources of the police, with much less resources, to try and solve this crime that has continued to plague them over 20 years. So I think that's an interesting thing in terms of Call of Cthulhu. You could start with a bunch of characters who have a certain set of occupations, and you can play that kind of generational kind of game almost, where actually they get to a point where it does seem to run dry out, and the players are kind of like a little bit frustrated and that, and then you kind of say, we're going to just cut to black here and maybe go and get a cup of tea or something, and then come back 10 minutes later and say, right, it's now 20 years later, you are now, you're now retired, you're now doing this, you're doing this, and that, here's your characters I prepared earlier that's slightly older. I've given you some bonus skill points, put them where you like. Where do you think you've increased them over 20 years? So players have immediately got like slightly cooler characters because they're better, but it changes their response. I think that's an interesting thing. So there's a kind of time delay, and also the fact that your character progression is different. So when they start the case, there are different people to how they end the case, and that might in itself be quite an interesting.
And obviously, changes in forensic techniques.
Yeah.
Things like that. So if you've got gaslight mystery, just something that just occurred when you were saying that, you could start off with gaslight mystery, and as long as people are aware this is kind of the plan, you don't just spring it on them. You start the mystery in gaslight. They don't get anywhere because they can't get the information because the techniques just aren't available.
Yeah.
And then you could fast
Like
forward
they've got the fingerprint.
the 1920s.
They have the fingerprints of the murderer. They know it's the murderer's hand, but they have no way to kind of work out. What do we do with these?
Because it's not acceptable.
Whereas your players know exactly. It's fingerprints, man. It's fingerprints. If only we could, work out what they were. And you cut forward a few years, and maybe it's them as older, retired people, or a young detective appears in,
their protégés or
whatever, who picks up the last clue they have that couldn't take them. Now can take them somewhere else. It becomes a kind of a different story again. So it's kind of,
and you can do that sort of cold case thing as well, where they come across an old case, things like that. So you can. Technology can be an issue, but you can also make it work for you in mysteries as well. Just to give it sort of like a slightly different framing thing. I've never watched, no, that's not strictly true. I have watched bits of Silent Witness, never quite got away with it. There was another one with Trevor Reeve in it that did cold cases, and that was quite an interesting one to look at for.
Wasn't he Shoestring?
He was Shoestring. I was too little to watch. I wasn't allowed to watch Shoestring because I was too small. I can't remember what it was called. But again, there's other ways of framing. They could be all police.
Yeah, I mean,
or forensics officers. Or
I can't think of a better character play than Morse. He spends all his time in the pub, down in beer. Occasionally does a bit of investigative. But great character to play. Because he'd just be miserable all the time. So my kind of character. But
Morse and the Mythos is actually quite an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah. And you got young Morse now, and that's all good. But
there's a really horrible one. I think it's from the second series. If you've not seen Endeavour, is it first or second series? There is a really, really horrible one that would work perfectly with just a few tweaks as a Call of Cthulhu campaign.
Well, I mean,
it's really nasty.
If you've never seen Endeavour, the Young Inspector Morse series on from the ITV, and you're a Lovecraftian kind of mythos fan, you kind of have to watch it because the people that write it clearly are as well. Because there's little Easter eggs in it. There's a sign to Midwich at one point. There's a couple visiting from America. The Marshes, I think it was visiting from America, from that seaside town on the east coast of America. I think it was near Innsmouth.
I missed that one.
You don't meet them, but this is just background on some characters that. And there's not many, but there are a few hidden amongst the series that you kind of go, I know, they must know what it's little Easter eggs, which are good fun.
Oh yeah, Easter eggs are fun. And of course, you can always go the Midsummer Murders route as well, where it's just absolutely ludicrous that everybody's kind of in on the joke. I mean, that's
but that's okay. That's Buffy, isn't it? We are on the Hellmouth, and every week somebody's going to come out the Hellmouth and cause us trouble. There's no reason why. The first scenario in your campaign is that this cultist opens this kind of arcane gate in the middle of the lawn of the slosh, and you didn't get to close it. You managed to get you managed to throw the cultist into the gate, so it's been dealt with, but you can't close the gate, and now you've got to keep an eye on it because something's going to come out, or something's going to be attracted to it, or more cultists are going to come. You've got a problem to deal with that you can't actually stop. You just got to deal with the consequences on an ongoing basis. Could be a whole campaign about that, and eventually maybe. You close it, or you just go, hey, let's all jump in and see what's on the other side. I don't know.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left. So are there any burning questions before we yield to the next panel?
And the only thing I was wondering when we were talking about the red herring stuff, something like the BBC series Broadchurch, which basically is about red herrings until the end.
Yes.
While the actual solution of the case is basically the most logical one if you're a police worker, because I won't spoil it, but anyway, it's if you go by the books,
yes.
It would be the first person you look into.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any way to do something similar with, for example, with Call of Cthulhu, where you can actually, because it's very rewarding if you watch something like Broadchurch, and I think it's also something where you draw much from it, because you can have a lot of NPCs which are really pretty fleshed out, and all the reactions of a small village.
Yeah.
It's almost treating a murder mystery like a sandbox. It's almost. Where in terms of designing it, you design whatever the crime is. Let's just say someone's been murdered. And then you decide, right, okay, so who are the people that know the victim? Yeah, so who are the victim's family? Who are their close friends? So all the people that the police would interview straight away. You know, who are the known associates of the murdered person? Because that's Broadchurch. These are all the people that have had some contact, and then you take it one step further. People that may be witnesses or party to the area or time that the murder took place. So that could be the lady that lives on the caravan on the beach and sees someone walking on the cliff edge, that kind of thing. And so you've now got a cast of characters that you, as the keeper, will write up a little backstory about each one. What is the key information they know pertinent to the case? Do they have a clue that helps to point the finger at somebody else or somewhere else? And you can mark them up, and you can have each on a card, kind of thing. And then you just basically say to the players, okay, so the murder's happened. What do you want to do? And then they kind of have free range to say, okay, so we want to interview the family. Okay, well, I've got that ready here. And you just go through, and obviously at some point you need to decide which one did the murder and how obvious it's going to be, and that just becomes a kind of a game with a cat and mouse with the players.
Yeah, but a follow-up question, because I would think that the best solution is not to have a fixed murderer when you actually, you have possible murderers, and also play along with what the characters actually unearth.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what we were saying earlier, isn't it? It's like you may have an idea of who you think it should be, but if the players actually come up, the way they're putting things together mean that it's actually it's more obvious, it's more sensible for it to be this person, then do that.
Or be prepared to change the nature of the game. Yeah. It could be that they after a little bit of time, they've interviewed a few people, but they've interviewed the murder, but they haven't accused the murder, but they kind of know it's the bloke, the man in the truck. He's the murderer, let's say. They kind of know it's him, and so they're kind of at the point that they're going to go and confront, or they're going to try and catch him out, and make that guy really intelligent. He's aware. He's been questioned by the police already. He's already nervous. He's thinking, I'm not going to hang around. And stop it becoming, so get to the point where the players have effectively solved it, they just haven't apprehended the murderer. You change it over, you stop it being an investigation anymore, and now it becomes a chase, because just as they go to get him, he's driving off, or he's cast a spell that means the shoggoth comes out the door at them as he runs off in the van, and it becomes a different sort of scenario now. They've solved the murder, great, well done. Now you've got to catch the murder. It's a different, and it's no longer Broadchurch, but it's...
Yeah, although one of my favourite Columbos is the one where they do cheat you. I'm not going to give the plot away, but basically you think it's one person, and he's absolutely... Even Columbo is convinced it's this person, and then something happens, and it becomes really obvious that no, actually it wasn't that person at all. So, and that can be quite fun if you handle... Don't do it too often, obviously. But that can be quite entertaining, because everything did point to that person, because for whatever reason they've actually set themselves up by trying to sort out a problem because of X.
Yeah. And ultimately I would kind of sum up the whole thing by saying that doing this style of game, the investigation is kind of what is the centre to it and what we're kind of enjoying, but actually what you're doing is trying to have fun.
Yes.
And so if the investigation gets thrown out, or you have to alter it, or it becomes a chase or a fight or whatever it may be, that's okay. Because what it's about is, are you all having fun? Are your players enjoying it? If they're enjoying the investigation and want to do all the leads, like you said, that's great, they're having fun, that's good, let them do it. If they're getting bored, it's just too many, we're not getting anywhere, move it up, shake it up a gear, have the murderer send them something, tease them, or have another murder take place. Have one of them stalked and attempted murder happen on. Keep them the focus, and keep it fun. That's what it's about at the end of the day. Yeah,
and it's all building, it's what we were saying again earlier this morning, building that story, building that engaging, entertaining story that everyone's contributed to and everybody's had fun with.
And there you go.
I think that's it.
I think we're there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.